This next guest that we have coming up right now, Michael Scheuer, I believe, is online. Let me give you a brief introduction to Michael. I'm really excited about this interview. This is straight off of the web here. He's a former CIA intelligence officer. He's an American blogger, historian, foreign policy critic, and political analyst. He's current adjunct professor at Georgetown University's Center for Peace and Security Studies. He's also, like I mentioned earlier, he served as the Osama bin Laden as the head of the Osama bin Laden counter terrorist center. Michael Scheuer, are you with us right now?
I am, yes, sir.
This is a true treat because we were talking earlier before you came on today. Every one of us on the panel are big fans of your work and really appreciated your perspective. And I think time couldn't be better to have you on today to discuss Iran, I think in particular. Simply because there's a lot of sabers rattling right now between obviously the United States and that region, and we want to give you an opportunity to give us some of your perspective as to how you see this playing out, where you think that might be coming, and maybe more importantly, what might be a better solution to this issue that we're facing. And so Michael, we'd please like to open up the floor and get your perspective.
Well, my solution to Iran is simply to back away from the problem. Iran is a problem for Israel. It's not a problem for the United States. It cannot hurt the United States militarily. It's a third-rate power. It's surrounded by a sect, the Sunni sect of Islam, that would rather kill the Shia in Iran than kill us. Its energy production has peaked, and with the economy it supports is declining. And if you look on the map, it's surrounded by U.S. military bases now. So it really is, in every sense of the Cold War term, it's contained. The one exception to that statement is that because the United States government has been negligent to a criminal extent in terms of domestic security and border control and border administration, the Iranians can strike within the United States with terrorist capabilities if we or the Israelis attack them. So this is really a very important issue for the United States. We're facing a threat that's not a threat to us in the military sense, but it is a threat to us if we or our so-called ally attack the Iranians.
Yeah, and some of the analysts I've heard discussing from the region have discussed that if actually we do get belligerent, it's actually going to play into their hands and solidify the people against the United States, because it's my understanding that the Persians traditionally are relatively pro-West in the region and really haven't been particularly belligerent to their neighbors for a couple centuries now. And so do you think that our involvement in that region is particularly for energy, our quote-unquote energy security, or that resource, or why would you say that we have such a belligerent posture against Iran?
Well, there's one essential point. We do have a national interest in the Persian Gulf for oil, and that's our own fault. We've done virtually nothing to move toward energy self-sufficiency since the first embargo in 1973. And so we're very much, if oil is attacked in the Persian Gulf for our own national survival, we'll have to fight for it. But in terms of Iran, Iran is, as you say, an ocean of Shia Muslims who are also Persians and not Arabs, or an island of them in an ocean of Sunnis. They should be our natural allies. Our belligerence toward the Iranian comes solely because our Congress is mostly owned by the Israeli lobby. And the Israelis deem the Iranians as an existential threat, depending on who's talking in Israel. And they have the complete power to drag us into a war in which we have very little interest, and which will certainly antagonize the entire Muslim world against us, Shia and Sunni. No matter what we say, for example, if the Israelis attack Iran, we will be deemed the person who sponsored it and gave them the green light. It will be a disaster for America.
That's, and that really, really scares me. What do you think could be done, at least on our side, or the Israeli side, if it's going to be such an issue or potential issue? Why would Israel have such a belligerent posture against them? I mean, what do they have to benefit from it?
Well, they're like a spoiled child in the sense they believe that the Americans are always going to be the cavalry that arrives to save their behinds. And I think they're probably true, and it's probably true in that regard. You remember, I carry no brief for President Obama, but he was designing a new policy toward the Middle East, he said, to make it less combative. And the Congress, both houses, stood and cheered Netanyahu when he came here in May of 2011, 29 different times when he was calling for war with Iran. So I think the Israelis think that we'll just help them no matter what happens. The answer to that, of course, at some point, is a return to the Constitution, as Dr. Paul says. The idea that one president, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, that one man can drag 300 million Americans into a war they have no interest in, certainly is contrary to the Constitution and to the spirit of the founders. So how do we get out of this mess? I clearly think it's the restoration, as Dr. Paul says, of constitutional proprieties.
Well, you know, I would totally agree with you, and the panel would too. We were discussing earlier, and it's kind of fascinating that you take a look at the stance of Russia and China relative to this. I mean, it's not a given that this is going to happen, but there's just a lot of tension there that could drag a lot of other interests into this and really become problematic. We're having a hard time understanding here logically how that's going to benefit either Israel or the United States or the region in general. And you said just leave us alone. Do you see from your perspective that there's any appetite for that, a non-interventionist, more diplomatic approach to this, or do you truly think that perhaps a Ron Paul presidency would be just about the only way we could get out of it?
Right now, I think Mr. Paul is about the only, Dr. Paul is only the only answer to the whole problem. The corruption that's come from the Israeli lobby in the Congress and in the media is such that we really can't do anything unless the president is willing to have the courage to stand up and say, no wars unless the Congress declares war. Until that happens, we will be dragged into wars repeatedly, as we have been now. Look at Mrs. Clinton. She's absolutely rabid to get into a war with the Syrians and with the Iranians. And you know, ultimately, we don't have an interest in either place. It's too bad that 8,000 Syrians have died fighting their government, but it hasn't affected one thing inside of the United States. It strikes me as ludicrous that the Russians and the Chinese have to take the actions that the founders recommended should be the basis of American foreign policy.
Oh, absolutely, Michael. Well, we have a limited schedule here, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But we'd just like to give you the last word. If there's anything you'd like to propose or give people information that they can go to your website and find out more about your views and your history so they can get a better rational approach to this issue. So please have the last word, Michael.
Well, I write a blog every once in a while on a place called non-intervention.com. But what I would like to say more than anything else is that Dr. Paul represents the correct position on foreign policy. It is both the common sense position and the position of the founders. And I can't think of anything that's closer to a good definition of tyranny than to have 300 million Americans dragged into wars time after time after time because one man decides that that's the right thing to do. That's just like having George III back in 1776. So I would say to all Americans that they really ought to look at what Dr. Paul says about foreign policies. And if they're interested in protecting their country and their children, that's where your vote should go.
Well, thank you, Michael. This has been a real pleasure. So all the best to you, and we hope to see you out there on the road soon. So take care.
Thank you very kindly. Good luck to all of you.
Thank you.